How can $75,000 still buy a real house in Florida? Not an empty lot, not a collapsing trailer, a 3-bedroom home with a driveway, a yard, and palm trees outside. But the listing leaves out the most important part. One of these towns lost more than 500 jobs when its largest employer suddenly closed. Another is still living with the consequences of one of the most destructive hurricanes in American history. And in one Florida community, you can buy the house without owning the land underneath it. These homes are not cheap because nobody found them. They are cheap because the real cost often begins after the sale. A roof insurers may refuse to cover, repairs that can cost almost as much as the house, a local economy that suddenly lost hundreds of paychecks, or monthly lot rent that continues long after the home has been paid for. Florida is one of America's fastest growing states. People keep moving here for the sunshine, the beaches, and the promise of a warmer, easier life. So how are ordinary homes still selling for $75,000? And why do so many buyers still walk away? The answer begins in Lake City, in northern Florida, with a 3-bedroom house, a quiet neighborhood, and an asking price of just $70,000. This is Lake City, Florida. And at first glance, the price makes almost no sense. Lake City is not an isolated settlement hidden deep in the countryside. It sits near the intersection of Interstate 10 and Interstate 75, two of Florida's most important highways. Jacksonville lies to the east. Gainesville is to the south, and thousands of travelers pass through the area every day. There are hospitals, national retailers, schools, hotels, restaurants, and businesses built around transportation and logistics. On paper, this should be exactly the kind of place where home prices keep climbing. And most homes here do cost far more than $75,000. But at the very bottom of the market, ordinary-looking houses still appear for around $70,000. Homes with 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, driveways, front yards, and enough space for a family. If you saw one without knowing the price, you might assume it was worth twice as much. So why do these homes fall so far below the rest of the market? The answer usually begins with age. Many of Lake City's cheapest houses were built decades ago. And in Florida, an old home can hide problems far more serious than faded paint or an outdated kitchen. The roof, the plumbing, the electrical system, moisture behind the walls, and an air conditioning system that has spent years fighting heat and humidity. In a cooler state, a failing air conditioner is an inconvenience. In a Florida summer, it can make a house almost impossible to live in. But age alone is not always what makes buyers hesitate. The real problem may begin with a document most people never see in the listing: the insurance inspection. Florida insurers pay close attention to the age of the roof, the type of electrical panel, the condition of the plumbing, and whether the house can withstand severe winds. A home may technically be livable, but still be difficult or expensive to insure. And if the roof must be replaced before coverage is approved, that $70,000 bargain immediately becomes a much larger investment. Then there is the air conditioning system, the electrical work, possible water damage, and years of maintenance previous owners may have delayed. Suddenly, the buyer is not purchasing a $70,000 home. They are purchasing a $70,000 home, plus repairs that may cost tens of thousands more. That creates an unusual gap. The house may be too risky for a buyer with limited savings, but not attractive enough for someone who can afford a newer property elsewhere. Lake City itself has not collapsed. It still functions as a regional center. It remains connected to the rest of North Florida, and thousands of people continue to live normal lives here. But convenience alone does not create demand for an aging home. Buyers also want certainty. They want to know the roof will survive the next storm. They want to know the electrical system is safe, and they want to know the repairs will not cost more than the house itself. Without that certainty, even a normal-looking family home can sit waiting. But a few hours west, the story changes completely. Because in Perry, Florida, the problem was not limited to aging houses. The town suddenly lost one of the employers that had supported local families for generations. More than 500 jobs were affected, and before the community could fully adjust, a series of powerful storms began arriving. This is Perry, Florida, and if you only looked at one of its cheapest houses, you might think you had finally found the Florida bargain everyone dreams about. 3 bedrooms, a front porch, a large yard, a quiet street, and a price tag close to $70,000. At this point, you might think you understand the pattern. Another old house, another rural town, another place that simply never grew. But Perry is different, because until recently, one enormous employer helped support much of the local economy. For generations, the forests surrounding this part of Florida fed a major industrial operation. Trees were harvested, loaded onto trucks, transported to the mill, and processed into cellulose products used around the world. The mill supported hundreds of direct jobs and many more through logging, transportation, maintenance, restaurants, and local businesses. It was not simply a factory outside town. It was part of Perry's identity. Families built their lives around it. Workers bought homes. Businesses depended on their spending. And for decades, the mill seemed like the kind of employer that would always remain. Then, in 2023, Georgia Pacific announced that the Foley cellulose facility would permanently close. Approximately 525 jobs were affected. In a large metropolitan area, 500 jobs can disappear without changing the entire housing market. In a small community, 500 jobs can change almost everything. Some workers found employment elsewhere. Some retired, but many families suddenly had a reason to leave. And every family that leaves a town usually leaves behind something else. A house. That is the part most people never think about. Housing markets do not change only because buildings deteriorate. They change because the number of people who need those buildings changes. When hundreds of paychecks disappear, buyers become cautious. Homeowners delay renovations, businesses lose customers, and younger residents begin asking whether their future still belongs in the town. That uncertainty eventually reaches the housing market. But losing the mill was only the first shock. Before Perry could fully adjust, the storms began arriving. Hurricane Idalia struck Taylor County in 2023. Hurricane Debby affected the region in 2024, and Hurricane Helene brought further destruction later that year. Even when a particular house survives, repeated storms change how buyers think. They see damaged businesses, fallen trees, insurance claims, roofs covered with temporary tarps, and families rebuilding while wondering when the next hurricane will arrive. That creates two kinds of uncertainty at the same time: economic uncertainty and physical uncertainty. Will another major employer replace the mill? And will insurance remain affordable after repeated storms? A property listing cannot answer those questions. It can show you the kitchen, the bedrooms, the yard, but it cannot show you whether the local economy will support the home's value 10 years from now. In Lake City, the risk often begins with the house. In Perry, the risk begins with the future of the entire community. The homes may still be standing, the streets may still be quiet, and Perry may still feel like home to thousands of people. But once hundreds of paychecks disappear, the housing market begins telling the story. Further north, the trail leads to Quincy, and Quincy's decline followed a very different path. There was no single closure, no dramatic announcement. Instead, an industry that once made the town unexpectedly wealthy slowly faded over generations. This is Quincy, Florida, and at first glance, nothing about it suggests bargain home prices. Historic buildings still line the streets. Large homes sit beneath old oak trees. A courthouse stands at the center of town. And Tallahassee, Florida's state capital, is only about 20 miles away. Everything about Quincy feels established, historic, even unexpectedly elegant. But the prices tell a very different story. Conventional houses have appeared here for less than $75,000, some far below it. These are not typical Quincy prices. Most local homes are worth more, but the fact that ordinary houses can fall this low reveals something about the town's past. Quincy's story began with an industry most people no longer associate with Florida: tobacco. During the 19th and 20th centuries, the surrounding area became one of America's most important shade tobacco regions. The plants were grown beneath enormous sheets of fabric, protecting the leaves from Florida's intense sunlight. The result was a smooth, delicate leaf used to wrap expensive cigars. For decades, tobacco brought money into Quincy. Farmers prospered, warehouses opened, businesses expanded, and some of that wealth can still be seen in the town's older homes and historic downtown. Quincy was once described as one of America's wealthiest towns per person, but industries rarely remain permanent. Consumer habits changed, cigar production shifted, agriculture became more mechanized, and the shade tobacco economy gradually declined. The town did not disappear. There was no single day when everything shut down. Instead, opportunities slowly moved somewhere else. One family left, then another. A young person graduated and moved to Tallahassee. A business chose a faster-growing county. An older homeowner passed away, and another house entered a market with fewer buyers. That is how housing demand can weaken without a town ever looking abandoned. The homes remain, the historic buildings remain, the community remains, but fewer people compete to buy the houses, and when competition weakens, prices remain lower. But this is where the cheapest listings become complicated. A $35,000 or $50,000 house is rarely ready for an ordinary family to move into immediately. The roof may be failing, the interior may be unfinished, there may be structural damage, and the house may not qualify for conventional financing. Once normal mortgage financing disappears, so do many potential buyers. Cash investors may examine the property, contractors may estimate the renovation costs, but first-time buyers often move on. That is something a real estate website cannot easily show. The listing shows the price, the bedrooms, the yard, but it does not show why the economy stopped producing enough buyers for all the homes the town already had. Quincy is not a ghost town. People still live here, businesses still operate, and the city has worked to preserve its downtown and arts community. But every old house was built for a particular version of Quincy. A version with prosperous farms, busy warehouses, and an industry that seemed permanent. The homes survived. The economy around them changed, and that is why a house can look like it belongs to a wealthier past, while carrying a price that reflects a very different present. So far, every cheap home has existed inside a smaller community, a place with aging houses, a lost employer, or an industry that slowly disappeared. But then we reach Pensacola, one of the Florida Panhandle's best-known cities, a place with beaches, a historic downtown, a major military presence, and a housing market worth several times more than $75,000. So when a home appears below that price, the question is not whether buyers noticed it. The question is why experienced buyers sometimes walked away. This is Pensacola, Florida, and it is not the kind of place most people associate with $75,000 homes. There are white sand beaches nearby, a historic downtown, a major naval presence, hospitals, tourism, and a regional economy far larger than those of the towns we have visited so far. The typical Pensacola home is worth several times more than $75,000. So when a 3-bedroom house appears around that price, it immediately raises a question. What happened here? Pensacola reveals something important. A city can have a healthy housing market, while individual neighborhoods and properties tell completely different stories. Drive 20 minutes in one direction, and you may find renovated homes selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Drive 20 minutes in another, and you may find a house requiring a complete rebuild. That is because Pensacola is more than the beaches and historic streets shown in tourism advertisements. The broader area includes older inland neighborhoods, industrial corridors, military-adjacent communities, and streets where demand remains much weaker. The cheapest houses are often located far from the coastal lifestyle that gives Pensacola its reputation. And many need serious work. Some are foreclosures. Others may have structural problems, fire damage, long-term vacancy, or interiors stripped down before the property reached the market. The famous city name creates confidence. A buyer thinks, Pensacola has beaches. Pensacola has jobs. Pensacola is growing. Surely a $75,000 house here must be an incredible deal. But housing markets do not value an entire city equally. They value individual streets, school zones, flood exposure, condition, and whether a property can be financed and insured. A house can technically sit in Pensacola, while feeling completely disconnected from the Pensacola buyers. Imagine, and that leads to the strangest question. If these homes are easy bargains, why have experienced investors sometimes left them behind? Investors notice almost every listing priced far below the surrounding market. They run the numbers, they estimate the repairs, they check the liens, they calculate the resale value. So, when a cheap house remains available, it may be because the renovation costs leave too little room for profit. The foundation may need work, the property may be difficult to insure, there may be unpaid liens, or the repairs may cost almost as much as the finished house will be worth. The low price attracts attention, but it also creates suspicion, because if a property in a recognizable Florida city offered an easy path to instant equity, someone would probably purchase it quickly. That does not make every cheap Pensacola home a bad deal. A skilled buyer with cash, construction experience, and patience may see an opportunity. But that is a very different buyer from the ordinary family imagining a move-in-ready Florida home for $75,000. Pensacola proves that cheap homes are not only found in forgotten towns. Sometimes, They appear inside active and desirable cities, but they exist in the narrow space between what a house costs today and what it will cost to make it livable tomorrow. If you enjoy discovering what cheap home listings leave out, subscribe to Priced Out America. We uncover the hidden stories behind America's most affordable housing markets. From Pensacola, the journey turns east toward Marianna, a quieter inland town where the low prices still carry the memory of a single afternoon, when one of the strongest hurricanes ever to strike America continued far beyond the coastline. This is Marianna, Florida, and it does not look like the Florida most people picture. There are no high-rise beach condos, no crowded boardwalks, no luxury marinas. Instead, there are historic buildings, old trees, quiet residential streets, and the slower rhythm of Florida's inland panhandle. It is the kind of place where homes below $75,000 can still appear. At first glance, that may seem logical. Marianna is far from Miami, far from Orlando, and far from the Florida cities attracting the largest waves of new residents, but distance is only part of the story. To understand Marianna's housing market, you have to go back to October 10, 2018. That was the day Hurricane Michael struck the Florida Panhandle as a Category 5 hurricane. Most Americans remember the devastation near the coast, Mexico Beach, Panama City. Communities almost erased by wind and storm surge. But Michael did not stop at the shoreline. Its destructive winds continued inland. Marianna was left with a damaged power grid, splintered trees, destroyed buildings, and rubble scattered across the city. For a housing market, a disaster